Hello and welcome to episode 69 and 70, Navigating the Indo-Pacific, Maritime Security and Geopolitical Challenges. We have seen on this podcast that previously we have discussed some of the issues related to the Indo-Pacific, but not so much focused on the maritime security domain. We have been discussing from the space technology point of view, some of them were from the defense point of view, but not so much into the geopolitical aspect and the maritime security. So today, to take a deep dive into this topic, we have with us Dr. Apila Sangtam. Hi, Apila. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Omka. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for taking out the precious time for this conversation, and I'm pretty sure this conversation is going to be very much insightful because this is the first time we are discussing the maritime security domain. So yeah, before taking a jump into the topic, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what inspired you to basically take a jump into this domain of maritime security research, the geopolitics, international affairs, and how has been your career path basically, and how did you end up doing what you're doing at the moment?
Okay, sure. Basically, I'll just start with my, education qualification because I did
Yes.
my master's in IR, International Relations, in Jawaharlal Nehru University. So there we did a lot of courses on, like maritime security. So I was very much interested in, the geopolitics and the current, like international politics when I was taking my coursework in my master's. And after that, I thought I will, dive into a little deeper. So I, opted for MPhil. And so after that, during my MPhil, I wrote a dissertation on South China Sea. So my then supervisor was, maritime security expert. So he guided me, he introduced me to maritime security and the South China Sea. So I was doing a research already, like, very much interested in the geopolitical tension happening in South China Sea. So after writing my dissertation, then, I did my PhD, and then my PhD was on India-US Indo-Pacific policy and its implication for Southeast Asia. So that's how, my research on maritime security and the whole Indo-Pacific, policy started. And after that, I also joined National Maritime Foundation. So at the National Maritime Foundation, it's a think tank in New Delhi. So they solely focus on maritime related issues. So my work over there was to look at, the maritime geostrategies of ASEAN member states and how it impacts the maritime geostrategies of India. So my focus on maritime security, or say the maritime connectivity, has been, solely, of course, shaped by my interest in academia, as well as when I joined the think tank. It was, I looked at maritime security more from a practitioner point of view. So that's how, my research and my, interests towards this maritime security, and especially towards the, ASEAN member states and also the US and India, kind of um, shifted. And I'm still researching. It's not that I'm an expert on this field, but I'm still learning and I'm still researching on this area. So I'm really happy for this opportunity to, help me at least, express my opinion and perspective on this topic. Yeah, thank you so much, Omkar.
Interesting. So, yeah, I think you started with geopolitics, international relations, and then took a jump into the maritime security. So, yeah, I mean, like, we are going to come to that point at the end of the podcast where I'll be asking you a question related to the how basically what is your opinion on, how people can basically take up this research domain and try to progress in this career path. Because I believe, there are several IR and geopolitical experts, but the niche level expertise is something that we really need, like maritime, the space domain, the air domain. I think the specialization research categories are something that are very much lacking, I would say, on an international platform. So I'm
Right.
really glad experts like you are there on this platform at the moment. So yeah, taking a jump into the topic, starting with the very basic question, what is the current state of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region?
Um, Yeah, I mean, currently a lot of, a lot of development and a lot of things happening in the Indo-Pacific region with regard to maritime security. I mean, if you talk about, of course, the geopolitics, which I'm really interested to talk about, which is the geopolitical tension that is happening in the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, as we all know, the Indo-Pacific region is a hotbed of geopolitical tensions, particularly because of China, right, and its assertive policies in the South China Sea. Of course, China is already, expanding its territorial claims, from nine dash land to recently 11 dash land, which overlaps almost all the maritime economic zones of exclusive economic zones of these maritime states, like for example, Philippines, Vietnam. So this kind of dispute leads to all this kind of tension that has heightened up the regional tensions, and it challenges the rule-based international order. So I mean, currently, as I mean, as if you look, if you're following the news, one of the most recent development that took place is the another seminal, I would say, geopolitical development that took place in very recent last month. I would say last month, yeah, on May 2024, which is just this year, at the headquarters of the Indo-Pacific, which is the Indo-PACOM in Hawaii, the US actually teamed up with two regional allies, right? If you're following with the news, Australia and Japan, they form a new grouping amongst them, which is called Squad. So we have a Quad and we have a Squad. So this is, I think, this is a very new development which we are seeing in the Indo-Pacific region. And this Squad, this the Squad joins the two other minilateral groupings, which was raised by the US earlier as a part of its Indo-Pacific strategy, which is the Quad, involving Australia, India,
Yes.
Japan, and the US. And of course, the AUKUS alliance comprising of Australia, UK, and the US. So, I mean, if you look at this development, I mean, you can say that it is a very well-known fact that these geopolitical groupings, right, like Quad, Squad, and all of that, are meant to temper China's increasing political military assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region.
Yes.
So basically, like the trigger of Squad, I mean, if you see that all this Quad or Squad or AUKUS, all this mini-lateral kind of grouping, kind of triggered the new development, which I just mentioned, which is Quad. You can say that it's an escalation of, it's an escalation by China, which, I mean, I have already mentioned about the South China Sea dispute, right? So this Quad was triggered by China, where in March 2024, which is this year, when the water cannon, if you remember the water cannon of the, like Coast Guard ship that damaged the Filipino vessels, and the kind of the clash that happened between China and Philippines.
Yes.
This kind of this kind of tension that has led to this kind of grouping. So I would say that this led to a combined military. This also led to a combined military exercises and naval patrols that's happening between the minilateral groupings in the South China Sea. And I think even early this year in April, the military exercises took place among the four nations that I was talking about. So a lot of things are happening, like strategic military presence that is happening, amongst the minilateral or trilateral grouping in the Indo-Pacific region. And, every time we see illegal, unreported, unregulated, this is called IUU fishing, that's happening in the Indo-Pacific region. There are always, new initiatives, regional security initiatives that are taking place, like I already mentioned, Squad, and all these things, so the maritime security in the Indo-Pacific is kind of evolving. At the same time, it involves a delicate balance of military strength, as well as diplomatic efforts and regional cooperation, to kind of address this kind of complex and evolving challenges. So a lot of developments happening currently in the maritime security domain. Yeah, so we can discuss this like as we proceed further.
Yes. And I mean, you briefly already mentioned some of the major stakeholders, but still, from your perspective, why is the Indo-Pacific region considered geopolitically significant, and who are the major stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific maritime security? Like apart from China, are there any, I would say, enemy or the allied groups which are present apart from China as well?
Right. Why the Pacific is considered geopolitically significant? I mean, it's a non-fact that because of its strategic maritime routes, as we know that the Indo-Pacific is a home to world's most critical sea lanes, including all the choke points in the Indo-Pacific, like for example the Strait of Malacca, the South China, the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, name all the choke points in the world. So these routes facilitates a substantial portion of global trade, including the energy supplies, making the security vital for global economy. In fact, the South China Sea is also very important because it alone handles about one third of the global shipping. So this makes it a strategic maritime choke point. So if you look at the strategic maritime routes, this choke points control over these routes, which ensures economic and strategic dominance, which also impact the global supply chains and trade dynamics, etc. And like I said, the region is rich in natural resources, like including the fisheries, oil, natural gas, and so on and so forth. Um, of course, it is also very important because of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. Like I've mentioned, the geopolitical rivalries, especially between the U.S. and the China. Um, and as I've mentioned earlier, like China's growing influence and its military presence, especially in the South China Sea, and of course now in the Indian Ocean region also, particularly its assertive territorial claims, and the island buildings, like for example the Coco Island, the the Ream naval base that they are constructing in Cambodia, all this island building activities that is happening in South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific. This has challenged the US led order. So the US, along with its allies and partners, kind of seek to counterbalance China's influence through strategic and also military deployment and alliances, so that it ensures that there is a free and open Indo-Pacific in the Indo-Pacific region. Um, it is also important, like as already mentioned, because of its economic hub, right? Like the Indo-Pacific encompasses some of the world's largest and fastest growing economy. Like India is one, Japan is one, and ASEAN countries. Like when you talk about ASEAN countries, Vietnam is one. It's becoming one of the fastest growing economic hub in the Indo-Pacific region. So all this economic dynamism, that is making this region a central hub for global trade, investment, and economic activity. So when you talk about major stakeholder in this Indo-Pacific, the major stakeholders are like U.S., China. I mean, like Japan, India, ASEAN countries. Particularly Vietnam. I would focus on Vietnam, Australia, Europeans. These are the major stakeholders in the maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. Therefore, I would say that the Indo-Pacific region's geopolitical significance, it stems from its strategic maritime routes, because of its rich natural resources, because it is an economic hub, and also the presence of the major geopolitical rivalries. Also, to ensure maritime security in this region, it need to involve a diverse area of stakeholders, which I've already mentioned, the countries which I've already mentioned. So all of whom plays a critical roles in maintaining stability and addressing all those multifaceted security challenges in the region.
Interesting. And as you mentioned about this prime players like US, China, and all. So, what are the strategic interests of countries like US, China, India, and Japan in the Indo-Pacific region? Because you also mentioned about the fact that I think US has teamed up with Australia as well. and there were
Right.
like two separate groups as well. So can you just briefly mention about the strategic interest of these countries as well?
Yeah. So, as I've mentioned, like, this countries, US, China,
Yeah.
Japan, and the ASEAN countries, they have a strategic interest. And if you look at it, most of these countries have similar, I mean, though diverse, but there are convergence of interests. Like, for example, like all these countries wants to protect its sea routes, right? The maritime choke points. They want to maintain rules-based order. They want to maintain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, and they also, all of them also have economic interests, as I have mentioned earlier. So each of this country wants to, maintain peace and stability in the region, and they have, different objective, and therefore they are initiating developments such as, like collaborating by doing a combined military presence, military exercises with its allies and partners, doing some economic initiatives, contributing it to the complex and dynamic security landscape. Like, for example, I would say IPMT, Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness. We also have this, initiative called Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and I've mentioned Quad, August. So all this kind of initiative, right? All this kind of initiative. So in each country, they try to aim to secure its strategic, economic, and security objective by, by introducing such initiatives. So I would say, like, they have similar strategic interests. At the same time, they are, different kind of interests. Like, for example, when it comes to India and US, ISET, the new initiative of India and US. I think there is the second iteration that's happening between India and US with regard to ISET, especially on AI, semiconductor, quantum technologies, critical minerals, defense and aerospace, and that you are expert on. So I think these are something which are strategic interests of these countries like US, China, even India and Japan and ASEAN members for that matter. Yeah.
Interesting. And just taking a step ahead, can you also elaborate on the main sources of tension in the Indo-Pacific maritime domain? I mean, we know the resources in the sea are the primary concerns, but I believe it all started with also the China's dominance in the Australian trade affairs as well. So
Right.
that is also kind of a primary, I would say, source. So from your perspective, what are the main sources of tension in the Indo-Pacific maritime domain?
Okay. From my perspective, the main sources of tension in the Indo-Pacific is obviously China. I mean, you can see whatever is happening, all the development that's happening in Indo-Pacific is, you know, of course, like to maintain peace and stability in the region, to provide, free and open Indo-Pacific to all countries in the Indo-Pacific region. But for me, if you ask me, like, what is the main source of tension, is obviously China, because of its expansionism, because of its militarization that's happening in, Ream Naval Base, I've mentioned earlier, in Cambodia,
Yes.
in Coco Island for that matter, and also, the resurgence of China, you know, China, they aspire to become a great maritime power, right? With a vision to maintain naval presence in distant seas across the globe. Like, for example, Solomon Island is one. So recognizing that this presence can only be sustained through logistic and administrative support. So therefore, Beijing, they seek to establish a military bases across Indo-Pacific region. And China's, like I've mentioned, China's engagement with Cambodia, right? Recently, there
Yeah.
has been a lot of development in Ream Naval Base. So they want to upgrade the Ream Naval Base, which is near Suhanokville in Cambodia, with a possibility of, securing some part of it as a Chinese naval base. this is a very recent development, and I think this is something which is very this is kind of disturbing, and this is kind of for its neighboring countries, especially like Vietnam. So why I'm talking about the Ream Naval Base is because the Ream Naval Base project has been elicited, much of a concern from international partners as well. Like, for example, the US, and I said ASEAN countries, and Vietnam in particular. So this Cambodia, they cite that its constitution, the constitution does not allow foreign military base and so on and so forth. But Cambodia cites its constitution to quell these concerns, right? So the absolute
Yes.
power to the current political party renders this as a weakened defense. So if so a review of this geographical, or say the naval and political topography of Ream, it reveals a significant strategic and military issue that China will have to resolve in order to leverage a military presence in Cambodia. So therefore, the China's involvement in this project, right, this Ream naval project, has
Yes.
created an Indo-Pacific axis of uneasy informal alliances, like for example, with
Yeah.
Cambodia, China on the other side, right? And US, Vietnam on the other side. So it has created a kind of Indo-Pacific axis. Um, Different now, like the 10 ASEAN nations, as you know, and their unity are, impacted by this development. As you know, that ASEAN, especially when it comes to South China Sea, they are not unified because not all the ASEAN member states are, maritime claimants. Uh, so, this kind of development only exacerbate their negative reaction to China's unduly, aggressive stance on the ongoing dispute in the South China Sea. So this South China Sea being part of India. So India, South China Sea is really important for India as well, because it is India's secondary area of maritime interest. So there is a reasonable scope for Indian Navy actually to leverage the additional concern of neighboring countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, right, to strengthen naval diplomacy in furtherance to India's own maritime security vis-a-vis China.
Yes. And I would say just a little bit, kind of a step ahead into the topic, taking a deeper look, I would say,
Right.
from sea law of seas as well. So, how do you
Right.
view the unlawful claims in the South China Sea, specifically on islands, groups, and historic rights?
Yes, this question is very interesting, and though I'm not a legal expert, but as I have a, like I mean, I have friends and colleagues who are legal expert, and while I was working with the National Maritime Foundation, the colleagues of mine who are legal expert, we had a lot of discussion on these issues, right? Maritime zones, the EEZ, and all those unlawful claims in the South China Sea. So, this kind of question is really interesting because you can counter this only through unclause. I mean, some unclause
Yes.
or international law is the only thing that you can go back to, to counter China. Um, so this question of unlawful claims in the South China Sea, um, if you look at it carefully, like, and if you are familiar with the constitution of PRC, which was amended in 1982 under Article 30. So if you read the Article 30, it mentions that the administrative area of PRC shall, and I will quote, okay, I'm reading out this constitution. So number one, the PRC shall consist of provinces, autonomous region,
Yes.
cities directly under central government jurisdiction. And number two, it also writes that provinces and autonomous regions consist of autonomous prefectures, counties, autonomous counties, and cities. Number three, counties and autonomous counties consists of townships, ethnic townships, and towns. So if you read at this constitution, the PRC constitution of 1982, Article 30, the constitution does not make any reference to China having sovereignty or jurisdiction on any island groups within the
Yes.
territorial measured from the baseline. So, so it does not mention. So China also relies on its interactive or interaction in the South China Sea during the Western Han Dynasty. So thus Beijing's narrative, the narrative of all this unlawful claim uh, about South China Sea. It begins as early as the second century or second century BCE, while Chinese people sailed the South China Sea and discovered some of the region's land feature. As you all know, this is the narrative that's China's narrative. But however, when you talk about UNCLOS, UNCLOS 1982, it does not grant any signatories, uh, the right to make claims based on historical legacies and rights. So it's very clear. Even if China is doing all those, historical claims, UNCLOS does not recognize, UNCLOS does not grant any signatories to this kind of rights to make such claims on historical legacies or rights. And I want to also mention this because we are talking about the unlawful claims, right? So the UNCLOS, again, under Article 2, mentions that the sovereignty of a coastal state extends beyond its land territory and internal waters to an adjacent belt of sea described as a territorial sea. So UNCLOS Article 2 is very clear, about what is territorial sea and so on and so forth. However, again, China unlawful claims itself to be an archipelagic state. So China is not an archipelagic state. It is clearly defined in UNCLOS, right? Definition given under Article 46 of UNCLOS, and thus making claims on all the benefits that accrue to archipelagic states under the convention, drawing straight archipelagic baseline, which is clearly written in Article 47. So, despite being a member of UNCLOS, as we know that China is already a signatory of UNCLOS, right? Um, China became a signatory of UNCLOS in June 1996. China is national in its national law on the territorial sea and contiguous zone of during 1992 under Article 2 claims that the PRC's territorial sea refers to water adjacent to its territorial land and includes the mainland and offshore lands, offshore islands, Taiwan, and the various affiliated islands, including the Diaoyu Island, Pangchu Island, Tongsha Island, Shisha Island, basically the four Shahs, right? And other islands that belong to PRC. Also, Article 3 of the 1992 law mentions that the PRC's baseline of the territorial sea is designated with the method of straight baseline, which is written in Article 7 of the UNCLOS. So this kind of statement, formed by joining the various base points with straight lines, this inadvertently gave rise to infamous nine dash line that I was talking about in earlier, which is not internationally recognized. So it is UNCLOS is very clear that these are very these are unlawful claims, and we have UNCLOS that clearly mentions that or clearly does not grant any signatory to this kind of claims by China.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a I would say an extensive perspective on the legal side as well. That's great to hear because we never really had a legal perspective on these issues on the podcast. So yeah, great to have this. Just stepping ahead into the same lines, I would say. So, how do you perceive the current state of standoff between China and the Philippines?
Yeah, I mean, the current standoff between China and Philippines. There's a lot of tensions, even as we're talking about there's a lot of tension between China and Philippines right now in the Second Thomas Shoal. And um, so all this that I talked about in the earlier, about the unlawful claims of China in the South China Sea. Again, I want to throw us back to, the constitution of PRC, because all this, whatever we're talking about, the geopolitical tension, the South China dispute, we have to counter China through the UNCLOS, right? Uh, so the constitution of PRC, in its preamble, right, it mentions that the nation has mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and believes in mutual non-aggression and peaceful coexistence. I repeat again, because China's, in its preamble, right, the PRC's preamble clearly mentions that the nation has mutual respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and it also believes in non-aggression and peaceful coexistence. So when China mentioned it in its preamble that they believe in such as such, what are we seeing in the South China Sea, or what are we seeing? What is happening to Philippines right now? The preamble further mentions that China aims to strengthen its solidarity with the people of all countries, support oppressed people and other developing countries in their struggle to win and safeguard their independence and develop their economies and to safeguard world peace, so on and so forth. This is the preamble of the Constitution of PRC. Um, but however, the current standoff between India and, be it Philippines or other nations, other maritime nations in the South China Sea, specifically I will mention Philippines and Vietnam. uh, it can be perceived as an outcome of Beijing's disregard to its own preamble, right, in its constitution and the UNCLOS. So when you talk about, like, respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity, it does not align with with its own constitution or with its own preamble. It clearly disregards its own preamble and the UNCLOS. So while China claims that it has sovereignty over island groups and that it has not violated any of the sovereignty of other nations by drawing 9-line or 11-line, actually Beijing's actions speak louder than voice. So that's where I will end. Yeah. And
And
another a very
prime,
important development that's happening between, like,
yeah,
as the current standoff between, Philippines and China is increasing. The tension is increasing. A lot of countries like US, Japan, they have also, raised this concern. And as you know, like, they have already, US and Philippines have already renewed their mutual defense treaty. And I think very recently, Philippines and Japan have also signed, RAA, Reciprocal Access Agreement. So I think these are very important development, that's happening in the South China Sea, because of China's aggression in the region. I think the Japan Philippines, they signed the reciprocal access agreement just, I think, just this month only in July. That would actually deploy forces on each other's, territory. So this is kind of a very interesting development that's happening, and we need to keep a close watch to what's going to happen next. If China continuously, kind of harass Philippines and its fishermen.